In this session, we're going to talk about measuring responsible marketing success. And this is different to measuring other forms of marketing. And we're going to go into some of the reasons why, the little nuances and bits and pieces to look out for and to plan if you want to assess whether or not you are a responsible marketer and you are responsible for a responsible marketing brand. So this is important stuff as we move towards becoming more socially responsible, more ethical, and more sustainable as organizations. So we're going to cover a host of topics within this subject. We're going to look at identifying some key metrics that will show significant evidence and prove that you are a responsible marketer. We're going to balance the social, ethical, and sustainable impacts of the work that you're doing. It's really important. We're going to go into some of the detail around what we call sentiment analysis, and really importantly, how the feelings of your target audiences then affect their behavior. Because it's all very well making a noise, it's all very well saying the right things, but if that doesn't affect behavior in a positive way with your target audience, then you haven't really achieved what you've set out to achieve. We're going to be interpreting this kind of data and responsible marketing evaluation with confidence. And we're going to demonstrate how marketing's role is a significant one in driving positive change. So this really matters. It really does matter. If you are an organization looking to become more responsible, measuring this stuff really, really matters. And it's only credible, the claims that you make, the evidence that you show, the stories that you tell, if it is actually measurable. This is a really important concept. You can be producing the best quality campaigns, the most impactful social media, for example, just those two things, and there's obviously many, many more in the mix, but it's only credible if you can actually measure the difference that it makes. And of course, your brand, as much as any other, is increasingly being asked to prove the impact, the actual tangible impact that you're making. It is no longer acceptable, if ever it was, to be just making bold claims that were unsubstantiated. So measuring success builds trust both within your organization, with external stakeholders, and of course, including your target customers, and will certainly help to secure support for future initiatives. And that can be, product development. It could be some campaign budget, whatever it needs to, continue and increase the impact of what you're doing. There is a phrase, I can't remember who said it, but what gets measured gets managed. And of course, the more you can be showing evidence, sharing that evidence, evaluating it, and really seeing tangible evidence of the difference that you're making, the more support you will get. This really is a snowball effect. It can have a profound impact on the work that you're doing going forward. So let's just take a little step backwards just for a moment and say, well, what actually is responsible marketing? Well, it's ethical messaging and honest claims. It's diversity, inclusion, and representation. It is sustainability initiatives in all their forms. It can be environmental through your supply chain. And of course, it's things like community engagement and social purpose. So when we talk about measuring responsible marketing, we're measuring outcomes across all of these dimensions, but using different types of data. There isn't one measure that says, oh, there it is, there's your responsible marketing index, and it's a number. This is multifaceted. There are many, many ways and methods and means of doing this, and it's really important to consider them and then balance them in the way that you actually report. But there are three core impact areas. So this is where we're going to start here. And each of these areas needs a different measurement approach. So the first one is social. So generally within social, in responsible marketing, you're looking at community building, you're looking at fair representation, you're looking at inclusion and diversity. So you're taking a social perspective on the activities and marketing that you're doing. So of course, then the measurement of those things is one factor within responsible marketing success. The second one is ethical. You need to be, as I will always say, honest, transparent, and true. So transparency is a key one here. So thinking about how can I measure the transparency of our kind of ethical campaigns and our ethical way of doing business. Things like data privacy come into ethics, as does obviously the spin-off benefit of increased trust, because you're going to trust yourself, you're going to trust all your colleagues, and of course, your customers are going to begin to trust you at a higher level if you are an ethical business. And think of some of the brands that you're aware of, some of the brands probably that you buy and engage with. It's very likely that you are dealing with and supporting and feeling trustful of those that are more ethical and the ones that can actually evidence that high level of ethics. And the more obvious one, I guess, for many of us, and this is often where we start on a sustainability route, is the environmental side. So carbon savings, our carbon footprint, obviously a core impact area, reduction of waste in all its forms, and sustainable sourcing of every service and product and widget that we buy as an organization. And of course, measuring those is a very, very different beast than measuring ethical and social. So you can kind of see once you start to go down to the next level down from this overarching kind of phrase of responsible marketing, you get into some nuances and some context that we'll need to consider in this very important stuff. And you can obviously sense already how important this is, because to get this right, you're going to have to be collecting data, analyzing it, and then reporting it back appropriately. So there are different types of methodology, if you like, for collecting appropriate types of data and information and insights. So the first one is quantitative. Now, these are basically tracking the numbers. This is the quantity. I always remember quantitative is numbers and qualitative is kind of like the quality. So the clue is in the phrase there, but I always find that's an easy way to remember this stuff. So this is the numbers. So what to track numerically or through numbers? Well, it can be things like engagement rates, for example, on purpose-led campaigns. I mean, what a great start there. So if you can see that there's increased engagement on campaigns that you're doing that are very much driven by purpose and they are very much in this responsible marketing sphere, then you can see that that is of interest and it's very tangible evidence for your audience. Click-through rates, for example, on ethical product content. Again, that can be really, really important. So if you're making, specific claims or you have particular evidence on maybe sections of your website, for example, and those are showing and reporting some different kind of click-through rates than the other product information, then that's a very, very clear and tangible sign that this is making a difference and that you're actually getting some impact. Uptake of sustainable options, things like eco delivery or sort of automatic refills and that kind of thing, some kind of recycling, whatever it happens to be. If you can see that there's a higher uptake of those options than the standard product or service that you deliver, again, that's a quantitative method of tracking the success of your initiatives. And if relevant, obviously, any carbon footprint savings. Again, many, many carbon footprint calculators available to you. I expect you're probably already aware of those and using some maybe. If you're not, they're very, very good to set the baseline or the foundation from which you're going to be doing and measuring your responsible marketing. So carbon footprint is an obvious one that a lot of us have been using for some time. So you can be looking at platforms like Google Analytics for measuring obviously the engagement and click-through rates. Some CRM dashboards may be there for uptake of sustainable options, because obviously then you can see the actual tangible sales and commercial benefit of doing this. And then a number of different ESG tools or carbon footprint trackers for doing your carbon analysis there. So that's the numbers, that's the numerical tracking of marketing, responsible marketing success. But then the other side is qualitative, and this is what to listen for and analyze. So qualitative is the more subjective. Obviously, numbers are objective. And subjectivity is something that you can still measure, very much measure. And these are tangible measurements as well. It's not just how it makes you feel as a customer. You actually have to then behave and act on that feeling. So things like sentiment analysis, and there are many tools which are now powered with AI as well to give you that extra deep kind of analysis that you can now do. AI tools like Brandwatch or Sprinkler, for example, measuring the sentiment. In other words, how do these initiatives, these responsible marketing initiatives that you're doing, how do these change how your audience feels about you? Sentiment is the kind of the feeling and the emotional impact that the activities you're doing have. So that can be a very nice one. And of course, you could balance that with an objective score. So if people feel in a certain way, and then they act on that, you're going to get two. So you're going to get a qualitative, the sentiment, and maybe some kind of numeric, quantitative output as well. So again, win-win, really precise, really kind of key to be balancing these things. As is another qualitative method, something like customer feedback. Now, for a lot of us, we are listening to our customers, actively listening. So this could be reviews or surveys, and even more broadly, maybe social listening. So you're actually listening to what customers are talking about around your topics and around your offering, and they're not necessarily talking directly to you, they're in social media. So lots of different ways you can sense what your customers are feeling, thinking, emotionally, and again, tying that back to the objective. And then what do they do? Do they still buy or do they go somewhere else? Because that could be a fundamental impact on your business. Internal feedback as well is also important. So your staff engagement, or maybe your other stakeholders like your agencies, or any resellers or suppliers, their engagement with your ethical campaigns or your responsible marketing projects. So getting that kind of qualitative feedback, and it can be anecdotal, so it can be just stuff you pick up in conversation. It could be that a salesperson's out there and they pick up a quote from what somebody said about the latest campaign that you've done, and they just add that into the system. And that, of course, can give you a really interesting take and maybe even trigger new ideas for other things to go and measure and explore. So these are all clues. They're little pieces of a jigsaw that are going to help you over time to monitor trends. Any shifting brand perception, for example, will often come through here if you are actively listening. So the key here, the quote that might go along with this one is listen as well as count. Really important. If you're building a really holistic dashboard for your responsible marketing activities, then just doing it by numbers or just doing it by sentiment or by the more emotive side of things is not enough. You have to blend them both. So listen as well as count is absolutely key. And of course, what that is doing is it is measuring the likelihood of a behavior change. So when somebody shows an interest in something, so they click through maybe deeper into the website journey, or they might give a sort of an inkling, if you like, that they are going to be interested in buying something or committing to a more ethical approach to the way you're doing business, or maybe they're going to trade up to a more premium product that comes with a whole range of more responsible and ethical services or add-ons. So that kind of intention is one thing, but actually what we need and what the planet needs and what society needs, and definitely commercially what you need, is to be able to track the behavior, not just the intention, but the actual behavior. And why does this matter? Well, the best responsible marketing changes behavior, not just awareness. So the fact people are aware of it obviously is a good start, but it doesn't necessarily translate into a difference. And of course, as marketers, we're here trying to make a difference, the right difference. So the kinds of things also to be tracking and looking out for are the percentage switching to lower impact products, maybe increased donations or volunteer sign-ups, maybe longer time on site for some cause related content. So it is about just really stopping and reflecting, thinking, okay, it's great to measure the obvious stuff, but what does this really mean? Can we go one step deeper? Can we actually get more engaged with stuff that actually is making a difference? And of course, that is the behavior that your activities are stimulating. So that's really important. And ideally, what you're doing is you're combining pre and post campaign data so you can compare it. That is the only way, really, truly, that you can actually measure behavioral change is to say, well, what was the behavior before? Then we did something, and then we measured the behavior after. And that is the only real tangible difference that actually carries weight, has some gravitas. So that is a key thing to be doing is making sure you've got that foundational data before you start. I've seen so many cases over the years of people who start measuring halfway through the campaign or the project without a baseline foundation to work from. And they've kind of missed the trick because they measured what actually happened, but then, that might have happened anyway. So you have to have those foundational pillars or foundational supports, if you like, in place before you begin. And then you can track the sentiment, then you can track those numbers, then you can track the behavior change. And that's when you're starting to really get a grasp on the difference that you're making, but also then what you can do next. And what you'll see as you start to roll this out is that you're going to be getting a lot of people starting increasingly to talk about you. So this is where community engagement metrics come into play. And you'll find that there will be more shares and comments on social purpose content. You'll find that you'll see more user-generated content, UGC, around things that actually are more valuable. People will be starting to contribute. And the really interesting thing is you will become a lot more attractive and almost quite a lot more enticing to the target audience who engage with this stuff. And these are people who actually passionately and in a real sense really believe and are living their kind of life with a higher purpose. And so they can become then real advocates. The growth of advocacy groups or partner collaborations will happen as a result of doing this. And so the community strength that comes then from this is a key indicator of the real and broader impact that you're making. Because yes, you've got to start doing this stuff. And yes, getting on a one-to-one basis and getting individuals committed here and behaving differently and more positively and buying into your purpose here is great. But then doing it at scale within a wider community is even more powerful. That is really scaling it up. And that is where all the research points towards you seeing a more tangible commercial success from this. And of course, because if you're willing to commit to this thing, it becomes sustainable, then the commerciality of this is also sustainable too. So you're looking here at something that should be very, very attractive to your organization if you choose to commit to it. And with the evidence backing it up, it's almost too good to be true because people will find this very, very hard to argue against. Very difficult to say, no, I really don't want to buy into this because the weight of support, the weight of evidence behind it is just so, so strong. So it is exciting. And what you're looking to do here, as people then start to challenge it, so you take this to your management team and they say, okay, it's looking good, but I want a little bit more. So then what you're looking to do is to make sure that your evidence is very robust. So measuring responsible marketing success comes with a sense of validation. And what we're looking to do, as we would always do, is not provide just numbers, but provide an interpretation. For many, many years, I've talked about the idea of turning information into intelligence. Information into intelligence. If you just stop and think about that as a phrase, it's very, very simple, profoundly simple. But actually, how many people do it? Most people will be reporting back the numbers. They'll give a nice graph and say, look at the lovely graph. It's going in the right direction. Without actually interpreting, yes, but why? Yes, but what else is going on there? So actually validating the data is a key thing. And of course, this, in one go, sort of helps you to avoid vanity metrics, which are indicators tied to, sort of very loose things rather than directly to your SMART goals and objectives. So by avoiding vanity metrics, you're kind of becoming laser focused on the really important stuff. And when you triangulate data, you might want to go deeper into this, maybe do a search and get a little bit more background on this. But when you triangulate data, in other words, you're looking for pieces of data that kind of sit together well, that give you consistent signals across a number of different metrics, then you can actually boldly go into a meeting and say, look, we're seeing it there, we're seeing it here, and we're seeing it over there as well. This is actually telling us the same story. And we've got three different areas. We've got, different communities, we've got different reporting, we've got different channels all saying the same thing. Then you've got very robust data, which you can then interpret and you can then ask, well, why? Why are we seeing this trend? Why are we seeing this kind of output, if you like, from the things that we're doing? And then you can go deeper into that. And of course, you'll need a little bit of help. You'll need some time, maybe use some AI to help you with this. Of course, AI now is very, very strong in terms of doing this multivariate analysis, as it's called. So comparing multiple sort of, sources of information and data and actually combining them in a really sensible and nuanced way. So there's some real power in this kind of analysis that you're going to be doing. And then, of course, as I said earlier, benchmarking against your own past performance, because what you'll get if you do that is almost a trend line that says, okay, here's our trend line. If we carry on doing what we're going to be doing, it's very likely this is how we will trend forward. And now look at this new activity. We're doing responsible marketing in these particular areas. Here's our evidence, and look at the graph now. This is where we're now trending. And of course, any management team worth its salt is going to then sit up and take this seriously. At the same time, as obviously you need to be backing this up with the actual sources, because again, when you take this back out to market, and particularly as well if you're doing this internally, you need to be watching for greenwashing red flags. So always backing any claims with the actual tangible evidence. So have in the appendix or in the notes, or have just up your sleeve the actual quote, the actual data, and the actual numbers. So I'm not saying that the data isn't important. Of course it is, because it got you to the interpretation and it got you to the intelligence and the recommendation. But have it available to you just in case challenged. That's always important. And the sources of the data, again, adding that validation of any arguments that you're making or any recommendations that you're bringing to the organization. So it's exciting stuff. It's really powerful, and it is a real trigger for change. So let's say that you now buy into this. Let's say that this is something that maybe you've been aware of, but you haven't yet done, or maybe you're starting the journey and you want to really kick this thing on, or maybe you could be right at the start and think, oh, actually, we've never done this, but we probably ought to. Then where do you start? Well, we need to start with a few little kind of case study examples, if you like, of starter projects that can get this thing going. So I'm just going to list a few and then we'll go into the three examples in a little bit more detail, just to show you where you can start small and then grow with confidence. And that's the key. I always call these pilot starter projects, so they really are piloting and testing both process, your kind of ability to do this at this stage. It might be that you need some more training or you need some more resources or whatever it is. You might not be able to get this right first time, and that's fine. It's not a problem at all. It is just about starting. So start small, and then you can grow with confidence with whatever gaps or whatever extra things you need. And the kind of things that you might want to be looking for here is maybe monitoring sentiment before and after an awareness campaign, maybe comparing engagement on a sustainability post versus a regular post. And that's small because that's an individual post. Maybe tracking clicks or downloads on an ethical product line. Mentioned that a little bit earlier. Again, if you've got different types of products, some that are produced in a certain way, or maybe the packaging is different, more ethical, more sustainable, whatever it happens to be, looking to see where there's interest. So starting small with individual product lines, possibly, or surveying a customer or a number of customers about their perception of your brand's values. If this really is ground zero and you've never really done anything like this as a brand before, then just starting with a baseline. What is our baseline? What do people really think? Could be a really good starter project for you. Okay, so let's look at some of these in a bit more detail then. So the first one, tracking sentiment. So if we took, for example, a sustainability campaign, so the scenario being your brand is launching a social media campaign highlighting a new plastic-free product range. Okay, so you might have to translate this into something you do, but your brand's launching a social media campaign to highlight a new plastic-free range. So, what to measure? So, before and after social sentiment analysis using a tool maybe like Hootsuite or Brandwatch, and that will give you the sentiment both before and after of how your customer or your audience or your followers are feeling with regard to your brand. You can then also measure the volume and tone of comments, positive, neutral, and negative. So actually getting a real sense, not just the number of engagements, but actually what the sentiment was within those engagements, because you might get a load of comments, but they're very neutral, or you might get one or two and they're super positive, or you might get a load and they're really negative. It isn't just the number, obviously, is it? When you stop and think about it, it's the sentiment of those two. And looking to see, not judging and saying, oh, look, we're really, really bad. But look, if you've moved from 27 negative comments to just four, that is actually a trend in the right direction. So, news in any kind of form is news. So what you're looking for here is just what is. Don't judge. Don't sort of feel bad for what you find, but just be really honest with the data that you're collecting because this will be useful later. And maybe something like the use of branded hashtags linked to sustainability. Maybe certain hashtags perform better, and maybe those are ones that you can do a deeper analysis on going forwards. So why would this matter then? Why would tracking sentiment in a sustainability campaign really matter? Well, it shows whether the campaign has shifted perception and triggered conversations around sustainability. Okay, so it isn't just about, yeah, we did quite well, and then you turn your back and you go off and do another campaign. It's about actually stopping and thinking, did we actually shift perception? Because if we did, then the next step could be to try and then use that shift in perception to change behavior. Jumping straight from, hey, look at us, we're the good guys, and then expecting everyone to come and buy is probably a bit of a leap of faith. You're probably being a little bit ambitious, but maybe this is the first step. Maybe the second step is then turning that new shifted perception into a change of behavior, which could be click here to buy this lovely new product. So I think it's about patience. I think it's about looking at the nuances of what's happening. And as we say, really understanding to help reveal what these people, these target audiences are actually feeling, not just what they click. So that you get a real sense of, I use the phrase a lot, professional intimacy with your target audience. So you can get a real sense of, actually, how are they feeling? I want to get inside their head. I want to understand what it is that they think and feel when they see what we do. Because once I know that, then I can actually serve them with some real value. I can do things that are actually really aligned with what they want, not just what we want to say, but what they want and need to hear. And that's key. That really is reflecting the voice of the customer back into the organization, which, as we know from a marketing communications perspective, is core to our role. So that's a really nice starting example. Second example could be something like measuring engagement on inclusive content. So let's think of a scenario. So you help produce a blog post and video celebrating a diverse group of customers as part of a value-based storytelling campaign. So it's blog post and video celebrating a diverse group of customers as part of a values-based storytelling campaign. So this is measuring engagement on this kind of more inclusive content. So what would you measure? Well, time on page for the blog. Yeah, because if you can find that you've actually increased the time spent on page, GA4, Google Analytics will help you see that one. The completion rate for the video, that would be interesting because even though you might get views on your video, to actually see that X number of people more than last time actually watched to the end, well, that's a very, very good indicator, isn't it? Number of shares and comments highlighting inclusivity themes. If you're finding that you're stimulating more conversation, more action in terms of advocacy, well, that's a huge one. That is a major green flag in terms of getting it right and knowing that your kind of sentiment and the emotional intent of that video or that blog is actually hitting the spot. So that's key. And survey responses as well. Does this brand reflect people like me? Would be an interesting one to ask that question, pose that question. Some of these things are quite bold because they are potentially quite sensitive, but they don't have to be. Again, using that adage of being, very open and transparent and honest about what you're doing and what your intentions are, that protects you. People don't mind it if you're being really honest and true because they can be part of a conversation that if you get it subtly wrong, helps to correct you. Everybody knows that everybody else is on a journey. But if it's when you go in sort of, I know everything, that's when you stand to be falling. But if you go in with just a very collaborative, very curative approach, then people will, okay, yeah, fine, we can help you do this. Yeah, fine, we can jump on board. And of course, the reason that this one matters is that these metrics will provide you with a picture of how your inclusive content really resonates emotionally and practically. So you're going to see how it's making people maybe feel differently about your brand, but also then act differently about your brand. And that supportive element with something like inclusivity is a surefire way of knowing you're on the right track. And inclusive marketing like this is only impactful if it genuinely connects. This is not something you can ever do in isolation because just by its nature, it is about the impact that it makes. Otherwise, it's not inclusive. That's why we use the word inclusive. And you can see what happens here is we just think, oh, yeah, we've done a bit of inclusivity. Yeah, yeah, yeah. On to the next thing. That's not inclusive, is it? When you just stop and think about it for a moment, it's like, okay, well, it has to include to be inclusive. So, really understanding and really embracing and really welcoming feedback is key for that particular example. And as we continue with our measuring responsible marketing success, a third example could be looking at behavior change. I've kept on sort of, banging the drum for this one because it is so important. It is only good marketing if you can stimulate a positive behavioral change. So let's describe here purpose-led campaign. So your scenario could be an email campaign that promotes a carbon offsetting initiative where customers can choose maybe greener shipping at checkout. Okay, so let's just say that's our target here for this one. So what could you measure? Well, you could measure email open and click-through rates and see how those differ to a typical campaign where you're not describing this initiative. You could look at the percentage of customers choosing the greener option and actually committing to it, because that's obviously different. Also, things like the cost difference versus standard delivery. That's an interesting one. You could play over time with the difference in cost and see how receptive the market is to paying a little bit more for a more green shipping option. And of course, then feedback or repeat behavior over time, because having done it the once, is that a predictor of future behaviors? Well, it might be an indicator of a chance that things are going to work out like that, but actually repeat behavior over time and actually looking and monitoring that. So seeing how many people then come back a second time and choose the greener shipping option. That is the behavior change that you're looking for because obviously in relative terms, it's easier to get somebody to do something once, but to get them to do it on a repeating basis, maybe from then onwards, every time is obviously a little bit more of an ask. So you know you've got it right and that they've bought into your purpose-led campaign if that happens. So behavioral metrics show whether marketing led to conscious action and not just awareness, constantly reminding ourselves that, okay, it's great to start with a change in perception, but it's only when that perception leads to a behavioral change. And we call this the gold standard. And this really is the gold standard. If you are looking to measure responsible marketing success, then the gold standard is how do I get and how do I stimulate and how do I encourage repeat behavioral change in a positive way? Because that is the only true benchmark of actually being consistently and sustainably successful in this. So the tools that I've mentioned as we've gone through this, just to kind of bring this one round full circle to round up and let you get on with one that you want to do. My recommended tools that would be probably sort of best set for this one would be obviously Google Analytics for measuring any kind of web-related activities here. Hootsuite Impact or Buffer, for example. Brandwatch, I've mentioned that. Talkwalker for sentiment analysis. If you're using the survey survey idea. We've mentioned surveys a few times here, then SurveyMonkey or Typeform. And of course, anything that's looking at a longer term behavior tracking, you're probably going to want some form of CRM tool, something like HubSpot or an equivalent. And really, really looking to explore maybe initially the free trials of all of these, if you can sort of get to look and maybe test some of these out before you then subscribe to one, is probably the best way. So I just really want to re-emphasize this whole idea of these are small pilot studies. You don't have to suddenly change all of the way that you do reporting, but just drip feeding these in. Maybe once a month you drip one new thing in, and over time then you'll be evolving towards measuring responsible marketing success, because what you'll be doing is slowly but surely you'll be turning the tide on just measuring either vanity metrics or stuff for commercial gain. It's not saying don't measure stuff for commercial gain. Obviously, vanity metrics we shouldn't be doing anyway, but the commercial gain stuff is clearly, as a for-profit business, which most of you are going to be, it is vitally important to do that. But the key here really is what we're doing here is to start to unwrap and unravel the untapped potential, if you like, of responsible marketing. So really what we've tried to do here is to understand what to measure across the range of ethical, social, and sustainable marketing initiatives that you could be doing. Maybe start in one area that you feel more confident with, but it is all three areas really ultimately that make a difference. Apply both numerical and human-centered metrics, so the objective and the subjective, the numerical and the sentiment stuff. The balance of those things is obviously really, really key. And use accessible tools to begin measuring this stuff, measuring your campaigns, your projects, your website, and over time, build confidence in showing marketing as a force for good. Because as you gather that evidence, as you begin to interpret it, then that is a key way of getting others on board. This is all about building momentum. Start small and make it scale over time. And so I want to leave you with three things really to begin this journey, if this is the start of the journey for you in this area, is to reflect on really what impact means to you. So when I talk about behavioral change, what does that mean for you in your target audience, your customers and other stakeholders? What does impact really mean? And push it a little bit further, maybe than you have before. There is huge potential here for growth and for impact. So find out what the word impact really means for you. And think as well, have you seen a campaign that made a real difference in your travels for you as a consumer, for you as a member of the public? What kinds of campaigns have you seen that are really making a difference in this area? Because we're not alone, as we're thinking about this, other companies in other sectors are. So keep your eyes and ears open for campaigns that make a real difference and learn from those. Maybe translate some of their wins into ways that you can do your stuff better. And think as well as you begin this journey yourself, what's one metric that you could begin tracking this month? Because if you can start literally right here, right now, and start to turn away from just purely tracking the old school stuff of commercial success and actually interweave that with responsible marketing success and the kinds of things that will actually really truly make a difference in the future, then you are bringing responsible marketing into a much more sustainable brand and business for the future.